Hey guys, I promised a long time ago that I was going to revisit this video. I really want to do it really quickly. I've tried to do this like countless times. It's always been like a half hour. I don't want it to do that much. So I'm just going to go over Kubrick's, this is Kubrick's filmography, Spotlight on Stanley Kubrick. I'm just going to go over his films and tell you what I thought of each one of them. His first feature was Fear and Desire. This movie is actually lapsed and its copyright is now available in public domain. It's not a great movie, but it's got a lot of like inner monologue voiceover that goes on way too long. It's a decent enough film. It feels almost like a episode of a television series where you haven't seen any of the other episodes. So, you know, it has its pluses and minuses. Overall, it's just, it's okay. See it if you're a really big Stanley Kubrick fan. His next was Killer's Kiss, which is a pretty excellent movie. It's probably, the story is pretty generic. It's a film noir, but Kubrick's ability to play with the lighting and all those kind of chiaroscuro elements of it are just really fantastic. And it's not a long movie. I just think it works. It's not a masterpiece, but it's a pretty good film. His next film was the first he did with producer James B. Harris. The Killing is basically the story about these guys who attempt to rob a racetrack, and everything is going all right until one of them like blabs to his wife, his adulterous wife, and then she tells her boyfriend, and everything just goes to hell from there. It's a really good movie. You can definitely see the influence of like John Huston and a lot of those, you know, like movies like Asphalt Jungle and a lot of those Detour and those early 50s kind of film noir movies, but this one certainly holds its own. It works really well. Fortunately, it wasn't a huge hit for Stanley Kubrick, but I like it. It's definitely a 4 out of 5. Next, I think this is Kubrick's first absolute masterpiece, Paths of Glory. It was based off of a novel that was based off of a true incident. During World War I, the French decided the best way to motivate their troops was to, that if they didn't feel they were giving it 110%, that they would just assassinate a couple of them to show everyone else. As they say in the movie, nothing motivates someone more than seeing someone else get killed. So, and Kurt Douglas comes in and plays like their attorney who's trying to get them, you know, off of being assassinated. It's just a lot of really great performances, and you really start to see a lot of Kubrick's style really began to shine in Paths of Glory. After that, he took some time off. He was going to do a movie with Marlon Brando called One-Eyed Jacks, but that fell through. And Kurt Douglas went off to make a movie based off this novel, but he wasn't getting along with the director, so he called Stanley Kubrick and he said, "Can you take over?" And on 2 days' notice, over the weekend, Kubrick got the script, and on Monday morning, he got to directing Spartacus. Spartacus is a movie that it's not the greatest movie of all time, but you can definitely see its influence in almost every other movie that has a subject matter like this that was made after Spartacus. The battle sequences in this movie have influenced everything from Alexander and Braveheart and Gladiator to Lord of the Rings, and just, like I said, any movie that deals with kind of hand-to-hand combat like this. It's definitely an interesting movie. You know, later on, Kubrick would say it wasn't really his film and kind of distance himself from it because it wasn't something that he kind of brought himself, like he read the book and he developed it himself. But according to the audio commentary that's on the Criterion DVD, years later he would discover it on television, and actually someone said that he thought it was a pretty damn good movie. So that's kind of how I feel about it. It's a pretty damn good movie. It's not a masterpiece, but it's certainly really good. And it was a huge hit for Kubrick. His next 4 movies were probably, you know, were incredibly controversial at the time. The first one actually got banned by the Catholic League, and it is Lolita, based off of a novel by Vladimir Nabokov. Basically, it's about this guy played by James Mason who marries Shelley Winter's character because he wants to get closer to her daughter, Lolita. But she's sort of infatuated with this television personality played by Peter Sellers. It's a really, really good movie. It's kind of tame nowadays, but at the time, people thought it was really, really scandalous. But it was a big hit for Stanley Kubrick. So, one of the best parts about that is the score by Nelson Riddle. After that, Kubrick made probably one of his most successful films of all time, Doctor Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb. Doctor Strangelove started out as a serious film based off of a novel, Red Alert by Peter George. But as Kubrick kept writing it, he realized that it would work better as a satirical comedy. The basic story is this soldier, or this general named Jack L. Ripper, or Jack the Ripper, decides that the Ruskies are going to eventually kill us and try and steal our precious bodily fluids. And he's going to get to them first. So he finds this loophole called Plan R and decides to nuke the hell out of them. The only problem is the Ruskies have invented this doomsday device that if they're ever nuked, this doomsday device will go off and blow up the world. But they didn't bother to tell anyone because they're going to have a press conference the next day. It's that kind of humor. Peter Sellers plays 3 parts in the movie. He plays this British soldier who's trying to talk Jack Ripper into giving them the code so they can recall the planes. He plays the president, Muffley, who's hilarious. I think that's his best part in the movie. And of course, he plays the German scientist, Dr. Strangelove, who's trying to tell them, what the consequences are going to be of them blowing up the world. And of course, you also have George C. Scott doing an absolutely over-the-top, hilarious performance as a kind of it's just really funny. If you've never seen it, definitely check it out. His next movie, from the surreal to the sublime, I guess, is 2001: A Space Odyssey. 2001: A Space Odyssey is really it's sort of 4 movies in one. The first is The Dawn of Man. The second is basically they all revolve around this thing called a monolith, which is like this big slate door. And the first part of it is when the apes they discover this door, and the next thing you know, they discover that they can kill each other with animal bones. Then the next section is about these scientists who discover one of these big monoliths on the moon, and they realize that it's sending a signal to Jupiter. So they send these other scientists out to track this third monolith down, and in the process they have a problem with their supercomputer HAL, which attempts to try and kill them. And of course the fourth part is when one of them reaches the monolith, and it just becomes like the surrealist movie that has no answers. It's one of those type of movies that you're going to have to watch over and over and over again before you really begin to formulate whether it's a great movie. I remember I had to watch this movie 4 times before I was like, oh wow, before I really got it. The thing about 2001: A Space Odyssey is that the technical advances, visual effects, and model work that was created through 2001 not only won Stanley Kubrick an Academy Award for visual effects, but also made it possible for films like Star Wars and later Aliens and almost any sci-fi movie made in the late 70s and early 80s. So they owe a lot to 2001: A Space Odyssey in terms of its model work and stuff. His next movie probably was his most controversial film, and it is Clockwork Orange from 1971. This holds the distinction as being the first sci-fi movie ever nominated for Best Picture. It's basically set in the future of these hoodlums, they call them droogs, who basically do nothing but get high and terrorize people. And when one day the leader, Alex, who's basically an asshole to everyone, he's an asshole to his parents, he's an asshole to his friends, he's an asshole to people he meets on the street, and they set him up to go down for this crime where he accidentally kills this cat woman, or this woman who's like a health fanatic, but she's got a house full of cats. And he goes to jail, and in an attempt to get out of jail, he agrees to take part in this controversial brainwashing technique that turns him into this guy who every time he's confronted with violence he becomes sick. Clockwork Orange, Malcolm McDowell said that Clockwork Orange is a black comedy, and I can definitely see that, but it's also kind of a satirical look at this notion, and a very kind of sincere look at this notion of whether or not and how much choice plays into our own humanity. And is it right to force someone to be something that they're not? So definitely check out Clockwork Orange. Clockwork Orange was the last kind of really big, successful movie for Stanley Kubrick. He'd only make 4 more movies, one more in the 1970s, which is Barry Lyndon. Barry Lyndon is basically the story about this guy. Barry Lyndon, he's not really that bright. He's this Irish guy who kind of flounders around, and he ends up getting caught up in the army, and then he marries this woman. It's hard to describe this movie in real detail, but the standout part about this is the cinematography. The entire film is done with nothing but natural light, and that's amazing because there's no artificial light, no light bulbs, nothing anywhere in the picture. And there are some scenes that were filmed with nothing but candlelight, and they look absolutely spectacular. Kubrick had to get like a special lens from NASA that they used to photograph stars in deep space in order to shoot the film, because it was the only thing that had low enough aperture. It took me almost as many times watching this as it did 2001: A Space Odyssey, but it's definitely one of the most underrated movies of all time and the most underrated Kubrick films. I think this is absolute 100% masterpiece. It's brilliant. The story is really good. The last half of the story is kind of heartbreaking. You really feel for Barry Lyndon in that second half, even though he's kind of a dick. It's just a really great movie. If you've never seen it, do yourself a favor and check it out. It wasn't a hit, unfortunately. And so after that, Kubrick spent 5 years really looking for a movie that he thought would put him back into the good graces of the film-going populace. And what he came up with is The Shining. I think The Shining is an absolute horror masterpiece. I'm not like the biggest horror fan in the world, but this, I think, is right up there with Psycho. I would put them on par. I would put them even. They both have a similar kind of feel to it. I've never read the book, but I've heard in the book it's much more clear that the hotel is haunted. This one, you're never quite sure if the hotel is haunted or if it's all in Jack Nicholson's character's head, which I think works better in the movie, because once you know it's a ghost story, you have nothing more invested in it, because you only kind of passively watch movies. Whereas with a book, you're immediately more invested in it because you have to use a lot more of your imagination to kind of conjure up the images, so those type of things aren't as important. They remade The Shining into a made-for-TV movie that sucked. It really, really sucked. This movie is an absolute masterpiece, whether you're talking about horror or anything. Jack Nicholson just does an amazing, amazing job in this movie, as does Shelley Duvall and the little kid. If you've not seen The Shining, you need to get your head out of this. You need to move out of the cave and check it out, because it's absolutely brilliant. He would make a movie for 7 years. I mean, it wasn't for lack of trying, but he tried everything until he got Full Metal Jacket. Now, Full Metal Jacket is interesting because at the time, critics, I think it's absolute people have asked me what my favorite Kubrick movies are, and it's this one, Barry Lyndon, A Clockwork Orange. And every time I watch this one, it moves up. I mean, I got a feeling that soon it will bump A Clockwork Orange out of my top 5 favorite movies of all time. It's just an absolutely brilliant movie that every time I watch it, it provides me with something new to think about. None of Kubrick's movies were really one of those where critics just immediately were able to catch on and say, wow, this is what he's doing. Because a lot of his movies are slow burns. You have to watch them over and over again before they really kind of sink in on that deeper level. And that's definitely Full Metal Jacket. I always tell people that if you're going to watch Full Metal Jacket, get something, read up on Jungian psychology, because it plays a really big part in understanding Full Metal Jacket. All the soldiers in this movie have... they all have nicknames. Nobody's actually called by their real name. But a lot of their nicknames, like Animal Mother, who's played by Adam Baldwin. Animal and Mother are 2 archetypes in Jungian psychology, as well as the notion of the duality of man, and that man has both the ability to build and to destroy. And the movie is really kind of playing off those elements. What does it take to create a soldier that can, go from being a normal person, sitting in a room talking, to then turning around and killing another human being for no other reason than that's what he was told to do. And it really attempts to examine those ideas and what it takes, and some of the positives that, it helps out in war, and some of the negatives, and that it can drive people over the edge. And, of course, Gunnery Sergeant Hartman learns that the hard way. He made a star out of Arlie Ermy, who a lot of you know probably as the voice of the main guy, the main green soldier guy in Toy Story. It's just an absolutely fantastic movie, and I like I said, I love it more every time I watch it. And of course, his last movie would not be made until 1999. It is Eyes Wide Shut. Like those other movies I talked about, this is one where I get something new out of it each time I watch it. The basic story is Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman play this married couple. He's a doctor, and she's kind of like a stay-at-home mom. And one day she gets mad. They're smoking pot, and she kind of gets mad at him and tells him, I didn't always have to be faithful to you. There was this one guy that I really wanted to fuck, and I dreamed about it and fantasized about it, and I would have if you'd given me the chance. I had thrown away our marriage, our kid, everything, just to go fuck this guy. And it really kind of jars him. And unfortunately, they don't get to kind of finish it, as he's called out to help this patient. And he goes out to help this patient, and he spends the rest of the night trying to get laid. And then and he doesn't. And then the next morning, he kind of goes around, trying to fix the things that he broke that night, and realizing all of the pitfalls that he missed. And there's a kind of a little murder mystery in there as well, or a mystery in there as well. And then, of course, they realize that it's probably best not to not to concern themselves with what's outside, that they should just go home and fuck. And that literally, that's what it is. I still don't appreciate Eyes Wide Shut as much as I'd like to, but you know what? Maybe in time. And that's it. 13 movies make up Stanley Kubrick's entire filmography. 2 days after completing the editing on Eyes Wide Shut, the man died of a heart attack. I think his movies are absolutely fantastic. The best part about Stanley Kubrick's films is that they have so much rewatchability factor. And, in the times of high def and DVDs and all that, having a movie that you can rewatch over and over again and feel as fresh as when you watched the first time is really fantastic. Kubrick was a visionary. He was an amazing technical director. And if you haven't seen any of his movies, definitely do yourself a favor. Check them out. All right, until next time.